Prepare thine ears, prepare thine bum. For the Things We Think About podcast has come. Now for your hosts, Kenny and Aaron.
All right, well, hello everybody. This is Things We Think About, episode 4. I'm here with Kenny. How's it going, Kenny?
Hello everyone. Good to be back.
We got a special guest, Cameron, who's with us, and we're going to be talking about deconversion. Some of you may recall from listening to our prior episodes, I think it was our first episode, we got a little bit into what we would like to do as far as the podcast, and deconversion was something that me and Kenny both share and think is important to talk about, and religion in general, but especially deconversion, because it's a whole process, can be a whole thing depending on where you're from. So today we're going to interview Cameron, and hopefully we'll have others to interview soon. So how's it going, Cameron?
Good. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to it.
So Cameron, just to kind of start off, where did you grow up? What church, religion, etc.?
Yeah, so I grew up in the LDS faith, which most people know by Mormonism or Mormons, up in Washington State. And kind of born into it, right? My family's family has all been Mormon back to, the founders of the church, really. So that was kind of the life I was born into, and kind of just followed along and believed that and followed it and worked on it all the way up until I was an adult, shortly after high school.
Nice. So that's about when you deconverted from it, or was it a little after that, before that?
There was an overlapping of time between kind of blindly following something and saying, this is what my family does and this is what I'm expected to do. And then up until the point where, I was a couple years out of high school, and there's that transition window for me where I didn't really ask the questions, but I knew that things weren't aligning in my head. And so I'd say I officially was, flat out atheist, maybe in my early 20s, 23 maybe-ish.
So how long have you been away from the faith?
I'm 39 now.
So good long time. So was there any point that you were, totally bought in intellectually, emotionally, were you a true believer?
Oh, absolutely. You start going in the Mormon church, and I don't know, we can go into any parts of that you'd like to know about, because, I was working on my mission. Obviously, missionaries for the Mormon church go out for 2 years of their young adult life, usually 18 or 19. They've changed the dates in the last few years, or the age limit. I think they bumped it up a year now. It's 19 when you go, and 19 to 20 or something. But back in the day, whenever you turn 19 or 18, you would go on your mission for your church for 2 years, and they would send you somewhere randomly in the world. I mean, you could be sent to, Brazil, or you could be sent to Oregon or Utah. And that was something that I was really excited about, something that I spent a lot of time researching and was extremely passionate about. And if you have a second, I'll tell you a story about my faith and how serious it was to me during that stage in my life where I was getting ready to go on my mission, and what happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard that's a really big part of the whole Mormon process. So please. Yeah.
So I should say that by the time I got to 16 or 17, I was living a standard Mormon life, with my Mormon family. I would go to church, a handful of times a week. It would be 3 hours every Sunday. It would be for an hour every morning before school. They called it seminary. And then for something called mutual, which happened every Wednesday for a couple hours. So church took up a large part of your life. And I didn't really question it, but I was also your typical high school kid, which at the time, meant I didn't really drink alcohol or have problems with that. What would be considered extremely inappropriate for the Mormon church, like the sexual parts of what you could or couldn't do at that age or any time in your life, that's where I kind of had problems with myself. So there was a lot of, I wanted to say two things real quick. One, I really love the people of the LDS church, even to this day, even though I'm atheist. And they were really, really good people. They're still good people to me. And I still have a lot of friends that are still LDS that I just love dearly, that I work with, as well as that are in my immediate family. So no bad things to say about that. There was no weird situations that happened, but you are raised in the LDS faith, at least I was, to feel extremely guilty for things that I think everybody does as a kid, right? Everything from, masturbation to stealing a candy bar once to, touching a girl's boobs or, anything like that growing up from the ages of like really young, like 8 or 7 years old. up until you were late in high school, those were things that you were very, very, very cautious about. And one thing that was interesting about how that worked in the Mormon church is you had to go talk to your bishop, which is the guy who ran your local branch, your local church. Whenever you had to get things off your chest, or kind of like a confession, but it's slightly different. It's always a male. The bishop's always male. And you go and start talking to the bishop really young. I mean, I was in there at 8 years old, talking to him all throughout high school. And they would ask you questions. It was just you and the bishop. And I loved my bishop to this day. He was a great guy, nicest guy, never anything inappropriate, nothing like that. But, they ask you direct questions about, do you masturbate? Do you do anything with girls? Do you do drugs? Do you do alcohol? I mean, it's a very, very private conversation that you have, right, with this leader. And it quickly instills the fear of God into you, where it's like, oh man, I mean, usually you lie your whole way through it. You're just like, no, I don't do any of that stuff. You crazy, but you're really doing those things. So I grew up in the Mormon faith feeling extremely guilty about what I was doing, even though being an adult now and looking back and having kids of my own, you realize that that's just like, that's normal kid stuff. And that was one of my major problems as an adult looking back on the religion, is the feeling of guilt that shouldn't really be there whenever humans are just being humans. That was one of my big complaints.
Yeah, that really does sound extremely personal, because certainly in my faith experience, I was non-denominational Protestant. We had the inclination, or the idea out there was like, well, like you just said, the small morality stuff, no sex before marriage, masturbation is bad, sin is sin, etc. But we never had any exact, at least I didn't have any exact follow-up. So it sounds like you had a very personal experience that was not only backed up by scripture or teachings, but you had a person in your life kind of slapping the hands. Yeah.
And the same person, that same guy, was obviously talking to my brothers and my sister and even my parents. You would go talk, even if you were an adult, you were having relationship issues with your wife, very personal. Someone cheated on someone, or you're having a problem with alcohol, and you would still go sit down with this bishop, and he was almost like a counselor, but not trained in counseling, just to your leadership of the church. But yeah, that was interesting. But as far as my faith goes and how strong it was whenever I was young, as I started getting older and kind of just lying your way through those interviews so you don't get in trouble and feeling extremely guilty for all that stuff, by the time I started getting close to 18, you have to start preparing for your mission if you're going to do it. And this isn't something that's mandatory. Some LDS or Mormons don't do this. They don't go on their missions at all, and some do. But I wanted to. It's kind of had been in the history of my family, and it was something that was important to me. So up until that point, I hadn't really read any of the scriptures of the Mormon Church, right? Anything that had to do with the LDS sect, I knew about from my family, and you knew the simple stories. And if people that aren't familiar with the LDS sect, it would be like knowing the story of Noah, right, or Moses parting the Red Sea from the Old Testament, or the New Testament and the Old Testament. Those stories they have stories just like that in the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, the 3 books that make up the Mormon's faith. And I didn't know any of them other than the fun, friendly kids stories, right? But as I started to get older and thinking, oh man, I have to go on a mission and teach these things to other people, I started jumping into these scriptures, and it brought up questions and all this other stuff. Now, at one point in the Mormon Church, whenever you're getting ready to go on your mission, you have to go through 3 interviews. You have to go through an interview with your bishop, the gentleman I talked to you about already. He asks you all similar questions that I just asked you about. Are you worthy of going and don't have any sin on you to go on this mission? The second one is his boss, which they don't call him a boss. It's the next level president. And then the third one would be your mission president. So you have 3 interviews before you can get the approval to say, yes, you're worthy to go on a mission. So interview 1, I lied my way through the whole thing. I was like, nah, I've never done any of that. I don't got anything to repent for. And let's do this. Number 2 did the same thing. But this is where it was starting to get to. I had one more interview, and they're going to ship me off to somewhere in the world, right? And I'm thinking, oh man, this is getting serious. And I don't really have a testimony of this church. I have my parents' testimony of this church, which is still strong, but not. I need my own. So I went and talked to my dad, who loved the guy to death, still LDS to this day. And I said, hey, do you feel it's okay to, go on a mission and teach others without having your own personal truth or faith about God and Jesus and specifically the Mormon Church and all that, and kind of basically, can I go to my mission and find those things there, or should I have those things prior to leaving? And my dad said, well, have you ever prayed before? Have you ever sat down folded your arms and prayed out loud to God and asked him these questions? And I was like, well, absolutely not. It almost seemed embarrassing, to be talking out loud in a room to Jesus. So I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, I'd recommend you do that and ask him these questions. I go one night, my mom's gone from the house. My mom and my dad were divorced at this time. I was at my mom's house. Everybody was gone. I went back into the back room. I got on my hands and knees and I put my hands, in front of my face. And I honestly opened up my heart and basically said, in the gist of it is, not only is religion true, but is the Mormon church the true religion? And these are the same questions you learn as a Mormon growing up that Joseph Smith asked God as well, God and Jesus in the Grove in New York, whenever he was having these same questions as a kid. There's scriptures that walk through his story, and it was similar how he felt. So I said this prayer, and I remember clearly with my hands bowed and praying, and I said, is the Mormon church the true church? And if it is, give me a sign, basically. And immediately I was filled with that burning beauty that people talk about, that still small voice, that confirmation of feeling that you get whenever you know that your church or your God is speaking to you through emotion or feeling. And I felt that 100%. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I was probably 17, 18
Wow.
at the time, preparing for this mission, and I left that rock and roll, ready to go. I was like, this is what I need. I started reading the Book of Mormon. I started memorizing the scripture. I started the scriptures. I started becoming really serious with getting ready for this. But remember, I had only gone through 2 of the actual interviews at this point, right? So for the 3rd interview, I decided, now that I have this faith that I was looking for, this confirmation the Mormon church was true, I need to go into my 3rd interview, and I got to lay it all on the line. I got to tell them everything that I've done. And it really sucked because the bishop of the time, the girl that I was sexual with was his daughter, so it didn't help any of this conversation at all. Yeah, and I know I kept it generic, but still. And so I basically went in and said, these are all the problems I have. I'm going to lay it all on the line. I've had drinks of beer, and it was nothing. This is nothing. I mean, there was nothing I can even recall as details other than, I touched some girls that I shouldn't. Of course, I masturbate. I've stole 2 things in my life. Things that everybody has done, or it's not uncommon, let's say. And he said, no, he was very cool, but he said, okay, well, now that we're hearing about this late, and it's close to the time you're going on your mission, we're actually going to have to put a hold on your mission, and we're gonna have it pushed out a year. And in the course of this 12 months, we don't want you to bless the sacrament, which is a thing you do before you go on your mission, pretty much after you're about, it's been a while, but I think it's around 14 years old-ish, whenever you're in your congregation, you pass the sacrament, which is equivalent to the blood and of Jesus Christ in the flesh and all that. And you're the guy that's up in front of the congregation blessing that food. And you do that as a kid, kind of giving you more responsibilities in the church. So he said, you can't do that anymore. He put a curfew on my personal life. So he said, you can't be out past 8:30 at night. And it was summertime, He said, you got to do these things, blah, 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 blah. You can't pray during this, just little things that weren't extremely crushing to me, but also I realized, oh my gosh, this thing that I really want to do right now, I'm going to be a year and a half out again from going to take care of all these things. And yeah, that was where the fork in the road happened. And it didn't happen because I felt jaded or upset at what the bishop told me I could or couldn't do. I was okay with all those things. But what it gave me the opportunity to do is start asking some real questions in between that time, things that I really wanted answers on. And that kind of goes into where I started, thinking about college, hammering out some credits, writing papers and kind of diving into things that were interested to me, researching things like anthropology, culture, and where people have come from, and how many, and statistics. You start learning about, space, and I took a couple astronomy courses. You start learning about the trillions of galaxies and stars, and you start putting things together in your mind, at least I did, about like probability, right? And what is the probability of me being in the 1920s, this Joseph Smith dude, seeing a spirit, and that's all of a sudden, out of the 40,000 researched religions we know about, what is the chance that's the right one? And that's kind of where that little crack happened in my story. And one of the real eye openers, though, one of the things that happened where I really looked at it differently was taking an English course where I did a paper on the paper. It was English 201, I believe, and we were doing papers on. I wanted to do mine on religion, and I'll skip through a ton of the boring details. But what the gist of it was I had a paper that I wanted to ask random people in not random religions, but I had a set of maybe 20 religions. So of course all the Catholic Christian sects like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses and Lutherans and all the ones that believe in God and Jesus, Jewish. But I also grabbed some crazy ones like Satanism, some Hawaiian religion that worship pineapples. But I got into some really obviously Islam and things like that. I just wanted to cover a wide range, and I had to find people that were these religions. So I found a whole bunch of people, and I asked them a series of questions. And out of the 10 questions that I asked them, there was really only one. The other questions were kind of like interesting questions for me that I wanted to ask, but there was one that I was going to compare against and analyze. And that one question on the list, I remember it was question like 4. And this was the question. Remember, crossing all these denominations and beliefs, whenever you pray to your God, be that Jesus, at the privacy of your home or with your wife, or be that Islam and you point your rug to the east and do the thing 3 times a day, or if you're Satan and you're bowing to the upside down star and you're talking to him, or whatever it is that you're doing whenever you pray to your God, what is the feeling that you get inside that makes you know that what you're doing is right, or that he's confirming that you're on the right path spiritually? And every single one of those was almost exactly the same. The exact same feeling that I had. Then I thought, well, geez, that's how I felt whenever I prayed at my mom's house. Like the same still small voice and that blooming of warmth inside you and whatnot was the same, no matter if you were worshiping Satan or a pineapple or Islam or nothing or a rock. It didn't matter. It was the same confirmation that they were getting. And I've been talking forever here, but just to finish that thought out, the very next thing that I went into was like psychology, and then you start learning about how your brain wants to, your psyche wants to answer questions for you that can solidify an idea or a thought you're unsure about to give you that peace. And religion is an example, but meaning whenever I went to pray and I went to sit on my mom's and cross my arms and pray and ask if the Mormon religion was the true religion, my psyche had already, this is what I believe my psyche had already told me what I wanted as an answer. It didn't want to say, no, dude, you're being an idiot. You're praying to something that's not here, and you should feel ashamed of yourself. And I walk away feeling guilty. That's not what my psyche wanted. So from a psychology perspective, I felt that, after taking some courses in that, I felt this is kind of what a body or a brain does to confirm for you what you want to be true. And it makes sense whenever you start looking at it from the perspective of all these other people praying to all these other things, getting the same exact feeling. And my last thought on that was I did get some feedback from religious people back that were like, well, yeah, but they're really all God, and they're kind of acting as a gray area umbrella that kind of covers all sects and religions. But whenever you get that feeling, it's God giving it to you. But it doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. It seems kind of a cop out. And on top of that, well, what's he giving you a good feeling about praying to Satan for, right? Like I could kind of understand if it's Buddha or some other, good deity, but there's a lot of those that weren't so good, and they get the exact same feelings. So that's kind of where my crack in faith started happening in my early 20s. And from there, it was just me weighing it out on a scale. And I'm a very, I'm an application engineer in real life. And so I'm very analytical, and I just stacked up data. I just said, hey, what's more probable? And that's where I got to where I'm at.
And how great it was that you were able to take the fire you had from this kind of road to Damascus moment. It sounds like you had sometime during your second interview and preparing for this potential pilgrimage, basically, or whatever you'd call it in Mormonism, that you would turn it into literally making a scientific survey of and trying to answer these questions in a scientific way. Kind of nice irony to that.
And I think that it doesn't seem an uncommon thing for me because I lived through it and I did it. But as I talk to more people that are religious, you get to understand that the whole point of religion and the whole point of the way that you're brought through it as a young, malleable brain, type of way, it's structured to have you not question these things. It's structured to blindly think of faith as something that just happens and it's correct, and feeling extremely guilty about asking the questions. And one of my, just as an example, I have many books that are written that simplify things that I believe are true, things like evolution and more scientific type stuff. Well, if I hand that to my father and say, "Hey, Dad, you got to read this. It's short. It's written for a high schooler, so you don't need to have a PhD to understand it, and it shows you why religion doesn't make sense." They won't even touch the book. They feel sick just knowing that you're offering it to them. Like, my son could offer this to me to read, versus me. I don't know if it was some weird thing I was born with, but I don't mind reading the positives and minuses of things, and then deciding and changing my mind depending on what I think has more evidence, right? I don't think it's as common out there or something.
It seems always to be the case that the reverse is never true, in that if you're open to somebody's belief as somebody who doesn't have a belief system or maybe deconverted, at least I found anecdotally in the people I've talked to, the opposite isn't true, right? It's harder for those who do believe something to accept that kind of, or to have that kind of openness to things.
Yeah. I find it actually kind of beautiful. And, there's like a transcendent element when you talk about, recognizing your own confirmation bias, because we're all guilty of it. Everybody is. But when you're able to recognize it and start to recognize those thoughts as they occur and like sort of self-correct, it exists as sort of a self-protection mechanism, as you hinted to. But I think that's super cool when you recognize your intellectual power like that, and you can really analyze and step away from like some of your human limitations, psychologically speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of those limitations, one of my thoughts on religion is, religion as a whole, I don't think is a terrible thing whenever you look at it at the individual level. Like, I have friends, a good friend of mine who got off, heroin and drugs, and he's been clean for 15, 17 years. One of my best friends, and just an outstanding guy, but he had, a length of time where he was really, really in the gutter with needles in his arm kind of stuff. And if for him, religion changed that, then I'm all for it, right? If religion changed that person to, I look at it as a crutch. Maybe they look at it as a set of escalator, right? That helps them easily up. Whatever it is, I'm all for that. But whenever I think that whenever you start researching the history of religion, it seems pretty nefarious to me, and from its beginnings. And I think that people be able to turn and say, I'm going to step out of this from the third person and look at this without emotion and see, what does this make sense? What is it that I believe, and why are these things, without feeling guilty? I mean, it would be huge, but like, it's just rare. It's just rare,
Yeah, you know what? I wonder too, because it sounds like you were somebody who was, I hate to keep using this phrase, but on fire in your religion. And it seems I've heard that story more than once. And certainly that's my story too, that the more you kind of get into it, if you had some inclination to critical thinking, that you kind of come out the other end. Because I always say for my own story that I kind of dug my way out through the end. If that makes, or through the belly of the beast, I always say, to keep using religious imagery and metaphors.
Now, did you get out of religion without affecting your relationship with your friends and family, or was it a different story?
No, for me, it was, I guess I pretty much came out unscathed, much like your experience. I didn't, in the clergy and in the church, I had great community. There was a lot of positive influences, nothing scandalous or like that. But definitely I had some friends who I don't speak with anymore, who, once they found out, more or less disowned me. It's still something we don't really, I don't really talk about that much in detail with my family. Luckily, my family isn't that religious anyway. I was kind of the one who was more on fire back when I was. So how about you, Kenny? I can't remember how it went for you.
Yeah, for me, it was pretty rocky, actually. Because I was a worship leader in the church at the time. So I was on staff, and, so that sort of amplified the struggle leading up to the point when I, quote, came out. But, at the point that I made my decision, though, I simply just stepped out of that role and, sort of parted ways with the church. But, I was already married, and my wife is a avid Christian and still is today. So that caused quite a bit of rockiness in our relationship for a little while. We came out the other side okay because we love each other for lots of reasons that don't have anything to do with religion, thankfully. But that was definitely the hardest thing. And her whole family, of course, she's got family that work in various church roles, and my whole family as well, although, a lot more flexibility, I would say, in what people in my family believe. So, nobody was as surprised in my family, but there are still a lot of people that I just don't bring it up to because I know ahead of time what the reaction will be. So I've been a little bit pragmatic on a lot of those fronts, but yeah, it was rocky there with my wife for a while, but we worked through it, thankfully.
And now you find that she's accepting of what you are. You're accepting of what her are. It doesn't interject negatively at all.
Yeah, for the most part, I'd say that's true. We we have 2 kids, and we raise them sort of a happy medium where we basically are trying to teach them to think for themselves. And, she just sort of teaches what her values are. And, I sort of do the same. But, at this point, I'll still go to church with her, the whole family. I have a lot of friends there, like really deep friendships there. So I don't have any problem going, and most of my close friends within that circle know, that I'm a non-believer. So it hasn't caused any friendship struggles. So,
one thing I thought of whenever you said morals, and that's something that I'd want to hit on, is I think that there is this misconception with the religious, right? That at least some of them that feel that in order to make the right decisions or have that moral compass, or to be someone who has good morals, or can be have good family values, they think that that's a necessity. Religion is to have those things. But I will tell you this: since I've left religion behind in my mid-20s to where I'm at now, my life has never been it's less stressful. I've done more for my communities and the people I love and nonprofits and volunteerism. I've self-reflected and bettered myself as much as I can. It's a daily struggle, but I work on it a lot. I find that without living with that burden over my shoulder of religion and what God thinks, it really gives me free rein to analyze these things myself and really focus on just being a better person, right? So it's ridiculous to think that a moral compass comes from something like that. You can look at a million different instances and a million different people that are such good people that really try hard, that donate massive amounts of time and effort into the betterment of the world, that don't believe at all, right? It's not reality that it requires that religious faith to be that kind of person,
I think most atheists or non-theists would sort of agree that morality is subjective, and we can appreciate that just knowing that even 2 non-believing people are going to have varied opinions on different levels of morality. So it's easier for us to be able to recognize that, and we fight less amongst ourselves just because there are a lot less restrictions, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, it was interesting because it seems like if you have to put your moral compass in something existential, I mean, I believe this now, it seems like it's pretty thin. It's not, when I think about the application to the real world, it doesn't seem like it's that great. The idea to me was never quite settled that I could just give my problems to God. It's something I've heard a lot in church, that, just give it to him and he'll take care of it and work through it, and through prayer and all that stuff. And to me, I just thought, I think there was always some tiny part of me that thought that was somewhat of a cop-out, because it didn't make you kind of face the thing fully. Not to say that that I do that now completely. I mean, there's certainly other scapegoats that are not God-shaped, but I feel the same way that you feel, Cameron, in that I'm definitely more of at least moral-minded person at the very least, where I'm thinking about the right and wrong aspects of what I'm doing in a more holistic and full-on way, other than just to say this is right, this is wrong, and then kind of go off those black and whites. Yeah, well, that's the thing. So we said that morality is subjective, but it's also relative. If you walk up to somebody on the street and straight ask them, is it wrong to murder someone? They'd say, of course.
but then you could qualify it by saying, is it wrong to murder someone who's trying to murder your kid? So
right.
There's too much gray there to be able to put it in the box of any scriptural text, something like Christianity or Mormonism. Like, they just don't do enough to solve those moral problems to be considered any kind of authority on the subject of morality.
Yeah, exactly.
They would never think that, of course. That would never be overt to them, but they're always going to do things like Prop 8 and all the, have a whole sect of, a whole wing of politics, more or less, in their pocket.
Mm-hmm. I also took a look at, and it's a little bit of a steer off this exact topic we're on right now, but back whenever, because I had a lot of these discussions with my dad right whenever I was telling him, look, man, I'm not a believer. This is my thing now. There were probably a 2-year span of time where he would come over to the house and he'd want to pray with my kids, and me and my wife didn't really want that to happen, and I kind of had to corner him in the laundry room and be like, listen, man, enough's enough. It's been years. These aren't my beliefs.
Yeah.
And we had many arguments about these specific topics. About he kept on saying, well, you can't tell me that X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, right? Because it's not solvable. Science doesn't know it. I don't know it. I don't know. And I would say, well, yeah, obviously that's the case. But the analogy or the example I'd always give him was, I think that if you go back, hundreds and hundreds of years, the amount of things that were that were not understood to humans, right? The sciences of the world and the universe that weren't understood probably constituted like 95% of a pie chart, right? I mean, the very large majority was just like, dude, if you don't know how it happens, it's God, right? If your church gets hit by lightning, you have sinners in your congregation, or if, and on and on. And as that puzzle as that piece of the pie starts to get smaller and smaller, where we do know why lightning strikes, and Benjamin Franklin throws a rod out in 38 feet outside of a church, and a lightning rod, and says, hey, if all you churches just put these outside of your church, they won't get hit by lightning anymore, and you won't have to put money in to keep on rebuilding these over and over and over. They had to say, the church has to say, oh man, do we do that? Do we put the rod out there and say, or do we keep to the, if your church gets hit by lightning, you got sinners. Yeah. So that piece of the pie that's not understood goes down to now we can explain probably 90%, 95% of the questions of the world. But the religious people really hold on to those last couple percentages where you just don't know. And a lot of conversations with my family and friends about those type of things.
Well, on that note, you talked a little bit about your psychological buy-in with Mormonism, but do you recall any experiences with what you feel was something supernatural? Any supernatural events in your life, either related to Mormonism or not?
As a kid, yes. And again, this might just be my analysis side of my brain that is always working. But as a little kid, yes. I mean, I can remember a story where me and a kid, probably 13 or 14 years old, were on a camping trip. We went out into the woods and we're walking around throwing rocks and doing whatever kids do. And we got lost and it got extremely late. And we live up in the, in the Northwest where it's foresty, extremely thick bears, And I was a scout. We were doing scouting stuff. We had our knives and stuff with us. Well, we got lost for many, many hours. Looking back, and we decided, me and my friend, to sit down to pray. We would just start walking the direction that felt good, and we would get back to safety. And that's exactly what happened, right? That's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. And it was this huge thing. Oh my God, we found it. Our prayers were answered. But as you start to become you could probably walk. If you break 360 degrees down into a bunch of chunks, there's only, pretty much 3 or 4 probabilities that could point you in a direction where you'd find people quickly. And you start to realize that it's like, well, I had a 25% chance of finding it anyway, and we just happened to guess the right chance. As a kid, you don't understand things like that. You can't look at probability. And so there's been nothing in my adult life that I've thought, oh, there has to be something pointing me in this direction. It's all circumstantial twists of fate in my mind, Yeah,
I can definitely relate to that big time. For me, that was always a bedrock of the faith that I had, is that I had these stories like X, Y, and Z could not have happened without God's intervention. And
yes, I hear about it all the time.
Yeah. I mean, so I think without these anecdotes, you basically, I just feel like there's nothing. And I can just recall so many times where I would use that as my testimony. and it would just always be great because, how else could it work? But yeah, as you say, the more you think about probability and just the things happen, how they're not how they're supposed to, but, like, for example, one of my big stories that I used to tell is I went to jail for a night because I had these these speeding tickets that I didn't pay off. And, I prayed and thought, well, if he gets me out of this jam, then, I'm definitely going to believe now. And then, of course, it happened that I had a friend who called and posted bail and all this stuff. And that was huge for me. And after that, I remember I had a huge boost for a long time with my spirituality and my testimony and just being on fire for Christ. So I imagine these types of things keep happening and they keep people kind of on the path, I guess.
Yeah, it's the whole Occam's razor thing, right? Like, to me, it's typically the thing that is the most obvious or the simplest that's going to be what the real answer is. And I think as the younger that you are, that those gears aren't working 100% in your head yet. You're still learning the things of the world, and you're still learning about how numbers and probability and chance works. And then there's obviously the things that happened, like the thing that you just explained. There was probably a very high percentage chance as you as a kid growing up in America with family that loves you, you were going to get out of the situation, right, by a bail or by something, obviously. But think about something that happens extremely rare. That's harder to say that, oh yeah, that was definitely probable. That's not probable. Like the winning the lotto equivalent of like something that happens crazy in your life. Like you get into an airplane crash and everyone dies, but you are laying on the side of the mountain in a pile of snow and you're fine. Those kind of things are harder to say, well, that's probable. But those are also things, that if you flip a coin X amount of times, the probability of it landing, straight up and down, balanced on its knife edge is very, very rare, but I wouldn't say that it would never happen. Those rare things do happen, but not very often. You know what I'm saying? Not very often.
So Cameron, regarding your Lost in the Woods story, looking back today, do you feel pretty strongly that it was completely due to chance that you guys made it back, or do you still leave room for some other type of supernatural event, such as just like basic intuition, whatever that means to you, or, maybe this long lost human ability to sense the magnetic field of the earth, which allowed you to remember which way you had come from? I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's way more probable than some dude flying around out there giving me direction, really. But I would say this, because I know where you're going with that, and I would never close myself off to a possibility, even if it was 99.9999999% not probable. I would always say if possibly, right? And that goes with religion. For instance, if God, came down from the skies and landed in front of me and said, this is true, and this is, you need to be a believer, I wouldn't sit there and try to tell him about how that wasn't the case. I would be a believer. Or if something happened that was extremely easy, if it was a scientific provable thing that happened, it was, I would believe. But until then, I wouldn't. It's kind of like that whole, you've heard if there could be a dragon on the other side of, Jupiter that we just can't see.
Yeah.
Well, there absolutely could be, because we don't know. There's nothing there looking at the backside of it. There could be, but probability says there's probably not. And until I see the dragon or extremely good evidence, I'm not a believer. But I don't close my mind off to those things 100%. I just think that it's very, very, very improbable.
Yeah, I think Occam's razor is probably the best tool in the kit for something like that. I agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. And it's unfortunate that I think that our human brain in its current capacity is probably never going to move past that. I feel are evolutionarily designed to see patterns where they don't exist. And, this is definitely no exception. And there's always going to be some God type of hole. I think it's just a matter of reasoning it out and understanding it so you don't let it influence you in all the ways that religion seems to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the God thing, we're sort of susceptible to that on lots of levels. One thing I think of is like conspiracy theories in general. I personally feel super prone, to the latest batch of conspiracy theories. I spend hours going down the YouTube rabbit holes, and every time I have to center myself, sort of using an Occam's razor type mindset, just to sort of hone and cut down on some of the ridiculousness and just sort of think
Well,
more
be
critically.
be glad you have that, because a lot of people don't.
Right.
They just go down the hole.
It's still
and
fun
never
to go
come
down
back.
that hole, though. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
It can be fun to go on a ride, just to see like how nuts does this really get.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.
And you know what ends up happening is it's all about people privy to information, right? It's like I don't know, like Area 51, right? Where you don't know what's there. No one's going to let you in to go look through all of its closets, so you're just not going to know. But whenever you look at the reality of what it probably is, again, Occam's razor, it probably is just a bunch of stuff you have no clue about for the safety of the Americans, for the safety of whatever. That's probably all it is. Now, because some dude was up on the hill with binoculars and saw some weird thing because he was tripping on peyote or whatever's going on, it's not enough for me to buy into the simplest solution, my point being is whenever people don't know, that is all filled in by imagination. And some people have the ability to look at that and say, yeah, no, that's come on now. And other people don't have that trigger that allows them to step back from it and say, this is crazy, right?
Yeah, for sure. So Cameron, I want to go back just a bit to when we were talking about the crack, basically the first crack. You were doing these surveys and kind of gathering your own evidence. So tell me more about that journey, because I know we left off where you were about to enter the third interview or close to that, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. So at that point, I think we didn't go on because there wasn't a whole lot after that. By the time college was happening, I had a kid on the way then. So I met a gal, had a baby, had another baby was on the way. I have two boys now that are teenagers. And it was one of those things where it was like I had answered all the questions I needed to answer for myself, where I was stacking evidence on both sides of that scale of is it real or is it not? And it was overwhelming to me to the point where I could close the book at that point, right? And just kind of walk away from it. But it's funny because I also feel, now I'm not talking about the part of religion that's spiritual. I'm talking about the part of the religion that's community based and more human, right? Me and my wife have always felt that we are missing something in our lives, not spiritually, but by the communities left behind, right? So I miss that sense of instilling good morals in your family, right? Not drinking alcohol, not, there's a bunch of things that might be a little extreme, but the purpose, if you go talk to any Mormon out there, 9 times out of 10, or more than that, 99 out of 100, you're going to find beautiful people that are absolutely sane in all things in their life except their belief in their God and the crazy stuff that goes on there. Yeah. But you're going to find these beautiful, amazing people. And I miss that part of religion, right? I cannot find a community that I can belong to as an atheist where I can feel like I have that commitment from a group of people to help me if I need help, and for me to give it help too. I've always been looking for that, I think, to this day. That's the part of religion that I do miss. And if you're in a bigger city, if you're in Europe where atheism is a lot bigger, right? I think there are some groups out there that try to fill that gap. But I do have that sense of not belonging to a group. I have a lot of friends and a lot of family, but there's no group I can go to and talk about things that I want to talk to about that are doing potlucks, that are teaching their kids to grow up like good people and help the world out and not be egotistical and that came from my religion, to the point where I didn't start drinking alcohol in my life just because it was ingrained in my head that you were going straight to hell if you did, right? Until I was 33 years old when I had my first drinks of alcohol, and now I'm a huge consumer of I love whiskey, so I wouldn't say I drink a lot, but I'm a whiskey fan now. But anyway, alcohol has never caused a problem personally for me in my life. It's always been something you do casually, and it makes you laugh, and it kind of loosens you up with groups of people. But man, I was told that was a slippery slope that led straight to hell. It took me till I was 33 and an atheist for years and years and years before I even considered what would happen if I drink alcohol. So that's interesting,
Yeah, actually, Aaron and I have talked a lot about that before, how we wish there were some mechanism that wasn't religion-based, because I totally agree. I miss that part as well, that, that quote, fellowship where people will just come together, they're committed to each other, they love each other, and, I don't know, there's something almost on the level of family about that I miss as well.
Absolutely, there is, and and there's some communities out there. This is funny too. I looked at some of these communities where maybe I'd join the Masons, the old stonemasons groups that are around, or the what is it, the Elks. I'm a pretty young guy. Considering I went to the Elks and everybody was 70, right? And but there was certain things that I had to do or say that made me not even eligible there. You had to believe in a higher power, for instance, at the Elks, you and I just was like, well, I would talk to my family who are in the Elks and they would say, well, just say that you believe in a higher power. You don't got to define it. They don't talk about it there. No one mentions it. There's no praying, and I go, but I can't just look someone in the eye and say, I absolutely believe in a higher power. Sign me up. It goes completely against what I believe, and that's what I find looking at these groups. Or there's groups out there that are atheist, but there are 6 people in a city, and it's like some Reddit meetup group or something, where it's like it's not serious enough for me to make family connections with and have these people in my life till I die. It's like I'm always striving to find that group,
Yeah, I completely relate to that. I've had the same issue with Overeaters Anonymous. I've been to some of those, and they're good up until you get to the higher power stuff. And it's actually, the higher power stuff doesn't bother me as much as just the sheer traditionalism and legalism and the rules and the structure of the thing. It's just so church-like. I cannot help but shake that. And everything from putting away the chairs to all the good stuff happens after the meeting and all this stuff. And it was just eerily too much like church. And at this point in my life, I'm too differentiated, I think, to go back to that.
Man, I never thought about it from that perspective. If you remove the religion part of those groups and you make another group with a different name and it doesn't have religion, they almost are all from a religious background, and so they end up taking processes and procedures and wrapping them around there that make it feel almost too close to religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's complicated, man. I don't have the answers, but
yeah,
it's a search.
It's funny you mentioned the Reddit meetup for the atheists. That's one of the first things I did when I came to Orlando, because I'm originally from Michigan. We're close to where Kenny's living now, and I went to an atheist meetup, and it was okay, but there was it's weird because there was like an overtone of bitterness and just harping on religion, and that's fine. And I don't mind doing that. Of course, obviously we're making in a sense, a podcast about that to some degree, but to have that be the only focus, it's just not quite the same thing, because even in religious context, your focus is a love, basically. It's kind of love-based, even though that's obviously, expanded to all this other scripture and weird stuff. But essentially, like you mentioned earlier, it's a community that is focused on just being a better person, even if that's not necessarily all great. There's enough good in it to where it's really communal and brings people together in a way that nothing else can. I haven't seen it, so I'm in the same boat you're in, basically.
Hey, I just thought of this on the side. Have you seen the Broadway musical, The Book of Mormon, where the Trey and Parker, the South Park guys have created it?
I'm sad to say I haven't.
I have not. I really want to see that.
It came to Orlando too. I had a chance and I didn't do it. It's got the damn song. It's got the damn Orlando song and I should have won.
Yeah, it does. Orlando, I love you. Yeah, it's a great flick, man. If you guys ever have the opportunity to go, get in there,
For sure.
Yeah, that's, you bring up a good point, Aaron, about, some of these atheist groups, as an atheist, I think that's one of the last places I'd want to find myself, only because, if this focus is sort of anti-religion, right? Because once you sort of step away from religion, some people maybe have that drive to sort of proselytize their atheism, but you pretty quickly realize you're just beating your head against the wall in most cases, and people just aren't willing to listen. And so most people end up just sort of withdrawing a little bit. So one of the last things you want to do is just harp on religion. You want to find something else that's more meaningful that you can move on to, that's more worthy of your time. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's 100% accurate. Yep. I want to be in a community where we're all atheists, where almost atheism never gets brought up.
Exactly.
It's a lack of belief. Just like atheism is a lack of belief in something, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I want to be part of a group where that doesn't even need to be brought up. I don't care anything about your gender, your color, your anything, your religion, or your politics. Just leave it at the door and let's just be humans and work together and love each other, man. We don't need all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at for sure.
I often find I'm explaining to people that being an atheist isn't necessarily in itself a belief system. I always try to go down the categories. Like, well, first there's theist, non-theist. I'm a non-theist, and I of course throw in the agnostic because really I don't know. And like you were mentioning earlier, Cameron, if there was some evidence, obviously I would be open to that. So I'm always open to the possibility. And going further down the categories, you get into beliefs, and for me, it's humanism, basically, and the laws of the land, and it kind of just goes from there. So that's how I always try to break it down to people.
Yeah, one of the little things that I don't remember if I read this on or listened to this on Joe Rogan or something in the past, but I basically tell people, when they ask me about being atheist, I say, well, being atheist and being Christian, or being atheist and being whatever religion the person is I'm talking to, is very, very similar. And I say, do you believe in Zeus?
Yeah.
No, you think that's completely crap? Do you believe in Islam? Do you believe in being reincarnated as a beetle, or whatever? Do you believe in all these things? Well, absolutely not. And I just say, I simply take it one God further. I agree with you with all that stuff you just said. I don't believe in any of it. I just simply also don't believe in your religion.
Yeah.
But we're very close to each other when it comes to that.
Yeah, that sounds like something Dawkins used to say. I cut my teeth on a lot of that stuff, especially at
that could have been where it was at.
Yeah.
That could have been where it was at. Yeah.
He had some zingers, man.
No kidding. Well, Cameron, so I'm interested to know, are there any sort of relics of spirituality that you do hold on to? Like, is there room for spirituality in your life? Do you find yourself with a tendency toward, something like philosophy from The Matrix, or from Avatar, or from like Hermetic philosophy, where, all is mind and this is a shared dream state, any of that stuff?
So that's really funny you mentioned that. I have a really good guy that I work with who's also a computer programmer, and we talk about these things, and he had you've heard it before, where we could be living inside of an alien simulation, right? And something like that, to me, is way more probable than anything I've ever heard before. And I also think it's not very probable, mind you, but if we're stacking things up on like why we're here and what we're doing here, and someone said, how far down is that on the list of probabilities for you? I'd put that closer to something that could definitely happen, where advanced races and civilizations have been able to, mind you, you sound like a crack case whenever you say these things, and I don't even believe this stuff. I'm just saying, if there was a probability, it would be more probable than Zeus flying around making us do things, or this whole thing. It would be more probable saying that civilizations have progressed to look at the way that we code video games, and you can make pick SimCity, or any video game where you could make a civilization on your computer screen. Why, whenever it's evolved for 20,000, 30,000 years, or 1 million or 10 million years, why couldn't you simulate the thoughts of people's psyches and make a big sandbox of this kind of stuff and just let it spin around and do tests on? I think that's more probable. Although I don't necessarily believe it, I think that's more realistic,
Oh, I mean, it's probable enough to be a fun thought experiment, especially when you consider, that if this is an alien simulation, or a Matrix-like simulation, and then within that simulation, we're developing the ability to create sub-simulations, sort of this inception level upon level upon level of these simulation realities. It's fun to think about.
It is fun to think about. It is. And the difference between a conspiracy theorist and someone like you or me is I think about it, and I like to dive deep on it, but then I get to the point where I'm like, well, that's probably not probable.
Yeah, and you just start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've also put so much thought in my life into religion that I kind of had to get to. I think that anything that you do in excess in life can be bad. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It doesn't matter what it is. You could drink too much water and die. Everything. And so I think with religion, for me, I had to get to the point where I was in my late 20s, and I kind of had to stop asking the questions, because I either had to go into theology or something in college and get a degree in it, or be one of those guys that won't shut up about it to other people. I just had to be like, this is what I'm content at being at. And I'm happy with my life. I'm self-bettering myself. I'm trying to make my communities and the people I'm around better and love each other. And that's it. That's it. I'm not going to go and keep going deeper. And maybe that's not good either. That's what separates philosophers from your average everyday dude. But I'm just your average everyday dude that doesn't need to look into it anymore. I've kind of answered the questions for myself and went and did the math, 15 years ago, and I'm happy with it.
I can absolutely relate because that's definitely where I'm more at right now. But for me, I worry about practical application. Like how do we actually solve the problems that are here and now? I'm not exactly worried about the heat death. I don't really have an interest, or it doesn't pique my interest as much to think about, what could be, when I know that the end result of that would be just, okay, well, I don't know. So what is for dinner?
Like the amount of time you'd have to research to get a answer to yourself. And I think that's the different types of people. You're obviously a type of guy, a type of person who can dig deep, right? But there's a lot of people out there that don't have the mental capacity, or they don't have the mental desire to do that. And that's not a bad thing. That's a different thing. I always tell my wife when we're talking about arguments or whatnot that it's not that she's wrong or I'm right. It's just that we have a completely different way of thinking about it, and perspective is all that matters, right? And it's that way with those going down the rabbit hole thoughts. I could go down I could pick a topic, and if I wanted to, could never stop thinking about it to the day I died. But there's just so much that's needs to be thought about, and it's hard for me to sit on one item too long. I'm kind of flighty like that.
Yeah, or just the fact that how things are interconnected and how everything plays into itself. Pretty much any topic, like you said, you could pick, and how they can all intertwine. And to me, I mean, if I had any type of spirituality, it's that we are inexorably connected to each other in a lot of different ways. We either see or we don't see. And the beauty for us is that we're living in a time where we may get to see some of those cool things and see how they connect and work. So,
yeah, absolutely. And you made me think of something kind of crazy too. So how a lot of people, well, I don't know how to word it other than, I think that your typical religious zealot, or even people that aren't religious crazies, right? Your typical everyday believer. But then you go into the level of you get away from the crowd that believes, and you go into the leadership. And then how far up do you have to go with the Mormons? You got your bishop, and then your stake president and mission president. And then it goes up to the quorum of the 60. And then you have the 12 apostles, and then you have the prophet of the church, right? Mm-hmm. At what level are these people just along for the ride because they checked off the boxes and they just kind of climbed the ranks, and now they're a leader of their really high up, versus the guys that actually think that they talk to God, right? Where they think that it's not fake to them, or it's not, I'm just trying to be a good dude and lead a group of people to do good things, but they actually think they have discussions with God. And I think that and this is a whole different topic, but I think that over the course of time, you would be surprised at how many of these people either have one of two things happening. These religious people that are unorthodox or come up with these religions, or the charismatic people that run their churches. I think that it either had to do with a little bit of mental of a mental problem, right? Mm-hmm. Where it could, they think that they are seeing these things, or psychedelics.
Yeah,
I think that with psychedelics back, you can go back as far as you want to go. There's people that have experienced with things sitting in the woods, eating certain things, and getting these type of experiences where they have no way to quantify them other than them being something that's religious, and that is a very interesting topic as well.
Yeah, all the stories too you have there, the burning bush and all the entire book of Revelations. That easily could have been a big trip.
Sort of a thing flying around pop culture right now. I think Joe Rogan mentioned it recently, was just that the burning bush could have been, or likely was, experience some psychedelic, probably the acacia tree, which caused some of the visions and some of the things in the Moses story there. Anyway, side note.
Yep. I heard the same cast. Absolutely heard the same cast. And I think that for me, the first time I did LSD, you were talking about my feelings on spirituality. Then you mentioned some stuff about being interconnected and if there's any belief there. Mm-hmm. And that's really tough for me to answer, because up until the point I did a psychedelic LSD, which was about 5 years or 6 years ago, I was literally convinced that no, there's nothing else out there. There's no interconnection of anything. But taking psychedelics in the right mindset, in the right setting, with someone that you love, or at a very, very, very peaceful time in your life, well, I came out of that experience thinking, but maybe, what mm-hmm. if? And not necessarily is there a God or that kind of thing, but more or less, is there this other level of connection between humans and living things, the trees and the grass that breathes under your feet, and all these? Is there something that does actually in science connect us, and we're just not privy to that information until we take something that messes with our brain. I don't know. That's one of the things I don't know. But it certainly made me feel like that way. I've never felt more connected to the world around me and the beauty of the universe and the people that I love, my wife and my kids. And it changed mentally who I was and how I felt about some stuff. I'll tell you that.
Cameron, I wonder if that experience at all parallels to the road to Damascus moment you basically had, that you were telling us about earlier. Do you see any parallel to that, or do you think it's a totally different time and place?
You're talking about the feelings I had of confirmation of my religion when I was praying in my mom's house, and how those may be on a level that I was able to see then, and as well as able to see whenever I was on acid. Is that what you're hinting at?
Yeah, I guess so, because I'm just thinking of numinous experiences and their impact on our lives, and how they can change our lives completely. And these are two moments, it sounds like, where, your perspective changed pretty radically.
Well, I think that they both have in common that your brain's doing something to you, right? And, both of those are situations. I mean, one maybe be induced by, I don't know. I've never even thought about that before, but it's something to put some thought into. I don't even know if I can talk intelligently on it without giving an hour's worth of thought. That's really interesting, Yeah.
Because I just think about I was going to say, I just think about that, and because I haven't had any of that psychedelic experience, and that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons me and Kenny are both interested in it is because there's promises of sort of those kinds of experiences.
Yeah,
there's promises of more than just that too. You have the promises of anything that I've done in my life so before I did acid, I wasn't a bad guy. I wasn't a bad dude or anything by any stretch. I was raising a family and just trying to go through this struggle of life we're all living through, right? But I never thought about anybody other than myself, my wife, and my kids, ever. And that was a immediate flip after LSD to wanting to be like, what am I doing for others? What am I doing to make this place better? What am I doing? Are we all connected here? I don't know, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try really hard to do some stuff. And that went down a road that I've been going down for 6 years, where I've just, I do wake up in the morning and I think to myself, am I trying to help out other people as much as I can? It's very important to me now, and it wasn't before LSD. I think that there's some really good things that can come from that. Your religion, but I'd also say that it's not LSD is not something that you would take and then say, I'm now going to be an atheist. It was my path taking it where I already was an atheist, took it, and maybe it made me start thinking about it in a more scientific way than, say, if you plopped it in my dad's mouth and said, "Hey, Dad, I put it in your tea in the morning. What happened?" He might completely be one of those dudes starting his own new religion. Yeah. He'd take it a different way. I mean, that's how they work.
I feel such a strong call to psychedelics, ayahuasca specifically, but also LSD and others, just because I want to explore that, that breakthrough in consciousness. I have this intuition that, maybe consciousness is all one consciousness, and it's something that really draws me to Hermetic philosophy as well. So, we're going to put a link in the show notes in this episode. But Cameron has some writing on the subject of psychedelics that I'm interested to read. I haven't yet. I just learned about it before the show here, but I'm super interested as well. And I think you touched on some really important aspects of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you want to say anything more about the link that we're going to share, or just let it speak for itself?
It's a short story I put together years ago, and it basically, the name of it is LSD Saved My Marriage. But it isn't only about marriage. It's about that point in your life where, I had to create a bucket list for myself. I didn't have to, but I woke up one morning just like that. Man, what am I doing? What do I want to accomplish anything before I die? I actually stumbled upon a Reddit post that was, what are your bucket lists? And as I was going through these bucket lists on Reddit and reading people's 10, and half of them are jokes and half of them are, memes. And you start pulling things out where people constantly reference certain things. And one was, do a psychedelic before you die. And it kept popping up. And it was nothing I had even thought about, especially coming from someone who doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. And during this time I hadn't either. in my early 30s, but I kept seeing it. So then I just started doing some more research. We talked about research, and I like to dig deep. So I started pulling, reports all over and reading scientific journals and realizing that, how much went into. I started realizing that there wasn't really anything bad about it. There wasn't really anything I could find bad about it unless, you did it in a really bad mental state and you had a reaction with your antidepressants or something like these. You read the thing on TV where it says, take this drug, but if you experience bleeding from your eyes, don't take it. It's like those little things can happen, but the very large majority of all this stuff, there was nothing bad about it. It wasn't addictive. It didn't pop up on your average drug tests. It opened people's eyes. So I just started looking at all this evidence and saying, why the hell am I not doing this? And so I put together a bucket list that was a handful of items long, and it was, learn how to fly an airplane and be a certified scuba diver and get a motorcycle and go do more motorcycle riding and better relationship with my wife and, find a Thai hooker and, I just wrote up this huge long list of stuff I wanted to do before I die.
Did your wife know about the Thai hooker part?
Yeah. So the funny thing is I kind of talk about that in my in the article I wrote, and I will tell you this: I've never told anybody which of those bucket list items I have and haven't done, but I'm happy to tell you what my bucket list is, but not what I've completed.
Very noble. That's smart.
So once I had the bucket list all written down, one of them was LSD, and I woke up the next day, right after I put together my bucket. Like the next morning, I woke up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to. Number one is scuba dive. Well, I started pulling up prices online. I'm like, well, I don't got $3,000. What's cheaper? So then I went down the list to try to, how can I quickly check like 6 of these off? And none of them were going to be quick or cheap, except LSD. But I was like, dude, I'm living up on the north side of my town here, and I said neighborhood. I'm not going down to some sketchy, alleyway and asking some shady dude for LSD. So I had to learn about cryptography and SHA-256 algorithms and the darknet market and Bitcoin and transferring and Bitcoin tumbling to not get caught and all this crap, and how to order it online and how to get it sent to you and all this stuff. It had to go into figuring out just how to get it in the first place, and then the kits you have to buy to test it. So I'm not eating something with some dude's urine on it, like how do I even know what it is? And so that the story kind of just talks about that experience, and then to the point where I actually sat in my backyard on a beautiful spring day with my dogs in my hand and wrapped up in blankets sitting next to my wife. And we tried LSD for the first time and absolutely fell in love with each other. And other stuff happened too. It wasn't just our relationship that got better, but I saw her as a person that had the same wants, or had her own wants and desires, and that was not that we were equals. I don't think up until that point I even thought me and my wife I always felt trapped in the relationship. It's like it was the first time I looked at this as like, I got this human living with me that's just as devoted to our kids and our, and looking in her eyes and seeing this, like you talked about, this interconnectedness of the world. And we cried together, which I don't think my wife had even ever seen me cry in my life. This wall went down, and that's kind of what the story is about. And still, every year we sit under that same tree and get to know each other for the first time again.
Wow, that's really beautiful.
That's incredible. And I'm a little scared now, because what you've described essentially is a very good, very many sessions of couples counseling. And my profession that I'm trying to get into is mental health counseling. I'm in my second year, and very much what you've described is people rediscovering themselves and who they are in the context of their relationships. And the idea that there's a wonder drug for that is pretty amazing. I mean, I know it's your personal experience, but still, it's really interesting.
The crazy thing about that, though, is you'll find the more and more people you talk to, that's why it's on people's bucket list, is that's not, it's not uncommon to feel that way. I think it is if you're doing it at a rave surrounded by, bass and people partying. Mm-hmm. It's all about what you want to take from things, right? But if you are a mature person and you don't have anything in your mind that's, where you're crazy or anything, and you're just your average everyday dude or chick, I can't see how LSD could be anything going into it with an open mind other than a beautiful experience. And it's only helped me in life massively.
Nice. I'm really curious too, if you feel like saying anything about the experience itself, specifically 2 things. Do you feel like your consciousness went inward or outward, or, well, I'll let you interpret that how you will. And did you meet any entities in that experience, non-human entities that you interacted with?
Right. So I don't know personally if you could take enough LSD to get you to the point where you're actually seeing other beings. I've taken as much as 400 micrograms. Your average hippie in the 70s tripping with a sign in their hand saying peace and love, and it was probably on like 60 micrograms or 100 max back in the day. So 400 is 4 times that dose. And I think a couple things. If you were a religious person and you took 400 micrograms of LSD, you could most certainly find your own revelation from some type of deity, either directly or emotionally, or a connection if you're looking for that, right? Me, I wasn't personally. So whenever I looked at it like, looking up at the sky and seeing the star, or in a different, not this the first time I did it, but looking up at a dark sky and seeing geometry being connected through things, or looking at the back of a leaf and watching and looking at the measurements between the little spokes that branch off, and looking at the bark of a tree and watching it breathe. It's more of a connectionness to everything around you, unless like there's a group of people or a deity out there. At least it was for me and my wife. I will say that DMT is not, he will see things on DMT, that you can get that a couple different ways. It's extremely powerful, typically a couple minute hit on a pipe with DMT on it, and you're going to literally be strapped to a rocket going 1,000 miles an hour, completely paralyzed in your bed or wherever you're at, and you will definitely see spiritual entities, no matter if you're religious or not. I've never done it, but I've read a lot about it, and I know that that's been around for a long time. DMT is. I mean, you can go down to Arizona during some mating season of some frog down there and rub its belly and take the glands off of its back legs. I'm not kidding, man. And you can put it like on a piece of glass and dry it, then scrape it off and smoke it, and you will be flying high as a kite.
Wow.
And it's also, it's not a drug like a heroin or anything. It's also a very quickly out of your system drug, but it can be very, very scary. And people see deities that are very similar. Like, it's not like people, one seeing Barney the monster, Barney the dinosaur, and another one seeing Jesus, and another one seeing something completely different. Everyone kind of explains the same beings that are there kind of controlling things. It's like a way to see outside into the matrix, where you're seeing the strings that are pulling it all. I've never done it, but that's how it's been explained to me. LSD feels more natural than that. I haven't done a lot of drugs in my life. I've only done LSD and shrooms and marijuana. But I feel like LSD feels very, very natural. And you know why the hippies are out in fields hugging each other in the 60s and 70s. It's because whenever you have that feeling of being on LSD, you just love everything. Not love it like an ecstasy way, a physical way. You just feel a connection to human. You feel very human. And you can almost taste it. You can almost taste that experience. And it's very emotional. It also, the next day after you do LSD, you wake up feeling like $1 million. I'd say for the first week after you do it, you just feel high on life. You feel motivated. You feel like you want to be a better person. You're just high on life. You feel really, really, really good. And it's not addictive, actually, to the point where if you take LSD on a Monday and then you take that same amount on a Tuesday, you'll only feel the effects half as much, and it diminishes that quickly. So you can't take LSD over and over and over and over and over. It won't even work. You got to wait weeks or months to do it. So these experiences are usually drawn out by months or years. And if you go into it with the right mindset, it's just an absolute beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Heaven forbid you're going to do it with someone that you love. It is very, very, very cool, man. And you probably read, being in the profession that you're looking at going into, the use cases for things like PTSD, right? And all these mental disorders that are out there. It's such a shame that we're being blocked from these types of research. Now, you hear that, like, Colorado now, I think, has legalized the use of shrooms. Yeah. In certain, I don't know the details of certain type of situations. I don't know if it's recreational versus medicinal or whatnot, but there's so many applications to help people. It's not just about laying around drooling on yourself, taking a drug. It has these applications that can change this fear in people, and it can take away the fear of death. A lot of people take it, before death, and people have said they just didn't have the fear anymore. You just felt like it doesn't matter if you're here or you're there on either side of death. You're part of it all. And even what science even goes back a bit to that, right? Everyone has star dust in them, right?
Mhm.
It's like we are connected, really. Like science shows that we all are connected. We have atoms in us that have been from the birth of stars. Like, why can't that be there, and why can't you feel it? And I think that you might be able to. I don't know, but I think you might be able to.
Well, Cameron, certainly your skills, your Mormon skills from proselytizing are not lost. Definitely, I feel like I want to do it right now as you're describing it. So
yeah, that's super insightful, and I apologize for our ignorance because we're obviously uninitiated. But so with LSD specifically, it's fun. You describe it as you're anchored to reality, and it's really just about dramatic perspective change.
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Okay. Yeah, anchored to reality and dramatic. And I don't know how long we have to talk, but I put LSD into 4 simple stages that you go through in taking LSD. I've kind of looked at them individually. In the first stage, you take LSD and you don't feel crap for like an hour, and you're pretty sure you got robbed. You're like, oh great, I just put a piece of paper in my mouth and it cost me, $15. And then, then all of a sudden you're like you start to feel anxious, and the way that it's not a bad anxious. It's the anxious like if you're strapped into a roller coaster that you're kind of nervous about going on because it's really big, and it's that clicking up right. It's the click, 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 click as you're looking, things getting farther below you, and you're getting to the top, and you feel like I'm strapped in. I might be scared to death, but I'm strapped in. There's no getting out of it now. And you start to feel that in stage 2. That's the only way I can explain it. And it's not a bad feeling, just like being on a roller coaster is not a bad feeling, but it sure makes you feel alive, right? And that lasts about maybe 30 minutes. The next stage is complete, utter laughter. Like I've never laughed so hard. You'll wake up in the morning and your jaws will hurt. And it's almost like the person that you're tripping with, like if it's your wife or a friend that you really love, they will say things like, a word long. They'll say like, could you imagine if, and it's almost like they don't even need to finish their sentences. You're so on the same level, and it's so funny to you that you almost can't breathe. It feels like you sucked in water. You're just laughing so hard in a beautiful, happy laugh. And then the next stage, that lasts about an hour. And then the next stage is the stage where things start to shimmer and move slightly. And if you type in on Google, if you Google, what does LSD look like or something, you'll find GIFs or something that kind of show you what that is. It's not demons jumping out of bushes type of tripping, right? It's very, very natural. It looks like someone took oil, like a colorful painted oil, and dumped it on a surface you're looking at, where it barely shifts. It kind of just moves back and forth very slowly, to the point where if you're only on 100 micrograms or 200 micrograms, it might not even be noticeable unless you stop to focus on something. And that's the stage where I think you notice the movement different if you take more LSD. If you take 400 micrograms, that slight shifting of colors and motion will be more exaggerated. Things might look more drippy or colorful. And everything looks like you're looking through an HDR filter in Adobe Photoshop. Like it looks like everything's exaggerated by 20%. Everything looks very, 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 very vibrant. If you look at your hands, it kind of looks like power, like you're a magician or something, and you can see like power kind of coursing through your hands. And it looks really cool, but you're never out of it mentally thinking. That's the cool thing, right? You look at it subjectively still, even though you're messed up. You look at it and you go, this is so cool that my brain is able to process this and make me really see my hand. It looks like pulsating with magic, for instance, right? Like it just feels like versus drinking alcohol, where whenever you get messed up, it takes away all your inhibitors. It takes away all your reasonable thinking, all your reasonable thinking. It takes away all your good decision making. You keep all those things on LSD. Anything you've read about someone taking LSD and jumping off a bridge, or some propaganda from the government it's all crap. No one kills themselves on LSD. But what you just kind of sit there in amazement at the things that you're seeing around you, and that's the second to last stage. Is this looking at You'll stand in front of a picture on your wall that you've never seen before, like you've seen on LSD. And whenever LSD is out of your system the next morning, from that day on for the rest of your life, you'll look at that piece of painting on your wall, or that piece of art, or whatever it is you decided to fumble on and look at, a seashell or whatever it is you were looking at for 2 hours. You'll look at it like you've never looked at it before for the rest of your life without another drug in your body. It's changed your perspective on that item or that thing. And then the very last stage would be complete, depending on the amount you take, is a complete introspective look at yourself and who you are. It's one of those things where that's where your self-reflection, that's where your deep thoughts, and it can kind of get scary a little bit if you're not prepared to look in a mirror deeply inside yourself and ask questions like who I am and what am I doing here. And if you're not a person that wants to see that, or it scares you, it could be a little frightening. You might have to get up off your couch and move to a different room, or you might have to, change up the environment you're in a little bit and go sit outside, lay under the sun, or something that makes you happier. But it's the time where you'll think about things very deeply about yourself, self-reflection. And then that's the last stage. From that point, it slowly trickles off for a couple hours until you feel completely normal. At one point, you'll think to yourself, "Oh my God, am I ever going to get my brain back? Like it's been going for 7 hours." But you do, and you wait a little bit, and you feel great, and afterwards you feel amazing, and you feel like you've accomplished something. Every time I've ever done LSD, I've learned something about myself that I haven't forgotten ever.
Oh,
right? I've taken a lesson away from it that I've learned that I didn't learn on any other trip, and it's been. It's been great. It's been great. It's been a really, really fun ride with LSD, and I'd say on average, I take it maybe once every 6 months, maybe 8 months to kind of realign myself and get my mind back in, where I want it to be. Another thing that people say is they call ego death, right? Ego death is where, literally your ego that stands around. I forgot to mention this is a huge part of LSD. Every single day, your ego is built up, and some people's are different. Some people are very egotistical, and others have a very small ego. But no one's going to want to say strip down naked and stand in the middle of the mall and let people look at you, right? They'll feel self-conscious, or all those things that make you feel what society has put around you is you need to feel a certain way about something. You gotta keep up with the Joneses in your neighborhood and keep your lawn looking great. You have to be the guy at the party that makes everyone laugh. All those things go away whenever you take LSD. And it strips down to the point where you'd feel 100% comfortable talking to a friend and just crying in front of them. And you wouldn't feel weird about it at all. It'd feel totally natural. You'd feel happy to embrace it. And the next morning, and this is the cool thing about the lingering effects of LSD, the next morning you wake up, that's not going away. It slowly diminishes. That's why every 6 months or a year you'll do it again. But you'll feel like that for months and months and months. You'll feel more open with people and more, it sounds like I'm peddling Herbalife, like I'm some salesman here, but that's just my feeling and thoughts on it. That's just how I feel about it, And it's one of those things where you can't explain it as much as you can until someone's experienced it. It's really hard to see what that's like,
Yeah, well, sign me up. That sounds wonderful and powerful and eloquently explained. Yeah, I really appreciate your time diving deep on that.
Yeah, and the article that I pasted for you there is it's actually a shorter version of what I just said, and it gives you a little bit of perspective on what I was just talking about. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that is incredible. Definitely something that I think we will keep talking about and talk more about, especially as me and Kenny as Versions kind of go through this process together and figure out, like you said earlier, just the means to get it, the huge learning curve to actually get the substance is one thing, and then of course the experience in doing it. So,
and I will throw that as a but don't try it. I'm not recommending it. Legality thing, right? Like you can get in a lot of trouble ordering it, and you can have it seized at your door. You can, there's a lot of problems that can come. I don't believe that it should be illegal, and I think that it can only make this world a better place. But the laws we live under make it just as illegal as cocaine. So whenever you're deciding to do those things, be completely aware that you're breaking the law and what that means to you. I've had a lot of people reach out to me on Reddit and be like, hey, can you explain to me how to, I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're the FBI chatting me up or anybody else. And it kind of is like, be really careful. You know what I'm saying? Just be really careful down that path. I wish it wasn't that difficult, but it's not, they don't make it easy,
I mean, it really just sounds like, too, you're reinforcing, for me at least, a lot of these types of breakthroughs, or just the idea that you would have such a dramatic perspective shift from a substance. Really, for me, again, parallels the process of therapy and self-discovery and all those things. And it kind of comes at a, immediate pace instead of parsed out through many, many sessions and things like that. But it also just gives people relief from who they are for a while. That was my first, I'm fairly new to marijuana, for example, and I only have done edibles. And my first thought when I was on that is, well, I can absolutely see how somebody with large amounts of anxiety could want to take this all the time, so they could feel in a state where they're comfortable enough to go out into the world and be themselves. It's a really incredible thing. Now, I, of course, personally don't struggle from any of that. So for me, it's just a laugh factory and, maybe I feel a little tingly. But for them, it could be easily something they have to take to feel normal, to be normal in their own skin.
Well, my wife, I don't want to get too personal with her, talking for her, but she doesn't drink alcohol and she only does pot. And she's just learned on her own through life that there's some things that, it's sad that alcohol is as accepted as it is, whatever the drugs out there that are so much less destructive and so much, even the opposite of destructive, right? Mm-hmm. Beneficial, mind you. It sucks that they're looked at the way that they are because she's completely gotten rid of alcohol in her life and she just smokes. I say smoking the pots. She laughs at that. But pretty much, a handful of times a week she smokes pot and she just it just chills her out. Anxiety goes down. She laughs a little bit more. No one's destructive. No one's doing anything inappropriate. It's just a way to, like you said, it's a way to get the feeling of not being the individual you always have to be. Mm-hmm. Without being destructive. And some people think that they need a lot of alcohol or a lot of drugs or a lot of whatever to feel that way. But, I don't feel that. I feel like psychedelics and pot are in those categories of the drugs that really just don't have a lot of downside. Anything has downsides, mind you, right? You can go to your doctor and get prescription drugs that I could list off 1 billion downsides. So LSD and those drugs have those downsides also. But you, like we were talking about earlier, stacking things up on a scale. You got to put the positives against the negatives. And if there's 2 things I can think of that are negative about LSD, but there's 182 that I think are life-changing, well, I'm taking the jump. Some people wouldn't because it's too risky,
And that's not to say that any of these drugs are a shortcut to, self-improvement, self-realization, all that stuff. You still have to do the work. It's just an ability for people to feel outside of themselves enough so they can look in and see exactly what's going on.
Oh, dude, that's a really good point that you made. That's a really, really good point. It's not going to solve problems in and of itself or even make you more. You're right. It's the open door that allows you to handle those conversations and have those with yourself. Mm-hmm. And if taking LSD and the door flies open, no one's forced to go through it. You'll get done with the experience and maybe not think anything. You have to take those lessons learned, and that's what I've done, and come out of those and self-reflect on them and what they mean for you, and then say, how am I going to make myself better because of these things? And if you don't, you're just opening the door. You're not going anywhere. And it's a good point.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, in the counseling world, usually drugs are more or less things we assess for. We ask, what prescriptions people are on, and we look at and view it more as a psychopathology more than anything, especially with drugs and marijuana. And we're just trying to see if these substances are helping somebody cope, and it's typically in a negative way. But we're never, I don't think we've turned the page, or at least as far as I understand, there hasn't been a theory that's really focused on the other side of that. I can certainly see in the future, especially as marijuana becomes more legalized, that there's basically a marijuana-based therapy where you'd get high and then have a session like that. Because right now it's very much frowned upon.
So what's funny about that, Aaron, is if you go back and you can dig this up on your own time, when we get done with whenever you have time. But if you go look at the studies, the clinical studies done across the United States with LSD back in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't illegal, right? Up until I don't remember the exact date that it was made, somewhere in the Reagan administration or something. But this was being used as a complete therapy session tool for many, 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 many years before it was scheduled a class 1. And you can go to this day and look up that information. You can go look at those sessions, and you can look at the statistics. Right now, because LSD has been, or psychedelics have been illegal for so long, for us it feels like, I'm from the 80s, man, right? I think of LSD and I thought of this is your brain, and then the egg cracks on MTV and it sizzles and it goes, this is your brain on drugs, and he questions, and then it shows some kid poking his eyes out, on LSD. That's what that's in me. I was a kid. I watched that stuff. But if you came from the generations before that and you were lucky enough to live in that area where it wasn't illegal, and you could go to a legal clinic hooked onto the side of your Kmart, and have a session where they dim the lights and they play the music, and someone walks you through your trip. This happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and the research is out there, and all of it is good research, and it was literally stopped overnight. It was stopped overnight. And so that has been done, and we've reverted back to this more dogmatic, archaic way of looking at those things now. It's all scary to everybody, Man, you're right in the right profession, to be looking into that stuff, and how there needs to be someone on the forefront, man. I'm in computers, so I've already gone too far down my life down this rabbit hole. But if I was younger, I would completely be researching how these things can be used to make people's life better, to relieve them of their fears, to help their relationships, to help with PTSD. It needs to be looked at, and it is. It's just very slow because of the loopholes that are out there right now, right?
Yeah. Hey, one thing I want to ask you, have you ever, or would you ever consider, Cameron, using LSD again in a flotation tank, sensory deprivation type environment?
Yeah, I would. I most certainly would. I thought about that, except the part is like you don't get on Amazon and order a tank for your house to lay in, I don't really know how to make that happen, but I would totally. And I'm a little bit more adventurous than your average dude, I think. So I don't know if it's just I'm pretty optimistic about what I can get from things like that. I feel that there's something to be learned. It doesn't scare me as much. And I'm a scuba diver, so I love the water anyway. I would love to be in a deprivation tank and trip on LSD. I'd be trepidatious of going into it, but I would still love to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll do some Googling. I've done it before, and as it turns out, there are quite a number of small facilities, usually like a massage therapy business or something, would have these. Yeah, so there are more of them out there than you think. You can float for something like $60 an hour.
Yeah, so my concern would be with LSD, like you can be really paranoid the first time you do it, and that's something I should have mentioned. The very first time we did it with my wife, and I told you about all those beautiful things that happened. Well, about 10 minutes before that, I was army crawling through my house because someone knocked on my door, and I was certain the CIA was there to drag me to freaking some camp somewhere. Like I was certain. So there's paranoia, and I kind of look at that where if you put yourself in situations where everything around you is normal and comfortable, you're going to have a lot better time. I would never recommend for myself or someone else to do an LSD and like be in an area that you don't know the people around you. You don't know, just anything that's uncomfortable, or like I would never pay someone $60 and go lay in a public area like that and be like, I'm going to trip on LSD for X amount of time and then have to figure out how I'm going to get home. It would scare the hell out of me. But man, I sure would like to build something or have someone, if those were private. I don't know. It's like, it would be awesome to try, but I don't know how to do it where I can still feel like I'm in the comfort of my home, or in nature, or somewhere safe, anywhere safe, not a public place.
That's very wise. Good points.
Excellent. So, Cameron, I really appreciate all your time today, and I'm just wondering if there's any final thoughts about Mormonism, about your experiences with drugs. Actually, Mormonism specifically, I was one question that I was going to ask you, and I'm trying, and I think whoever we interview, I'd like to ask them as a kind of a closing question, is if you could change anything about your experience growing up. Basically, it sounds like from what you've told me, it was mostly positive, but I'm just wondering if there's anything, if you could change, that you would. And if so, what would that be?
From the perspective of life, yes. Just everyone makes mistakes with stuff. But as far as religion goes, I don't think so. I was lucky enough, and I think this is really rare, where I was able to get the good things that religion offers, like what we talked about not having in our lives now, right? Some of that community, a little bit of a moral compass that I don't think comes from religion, but it's really enforced with religion. And just helping your neighbor out and going over and giving service to people. And like, I got all that stuff before I believed in what I was doing, like as a kid growing up, where it was just normal. You go to potlucks and everyone brings a dish and you all love each other, and the neighbor needs something, we'll go mow his lawn for free. Those type of things were very common in my childhood. So I was extremely lucky. And whenever I got to the point where I was turning into adulthood and I stopped feeling that way, I had already gotten the benefits of what I think the good things that come from religion are. So I don't really know if there's anything. I pretty much, it was as good as it could be, right? Beautiful, loving family, it was all good. There was no bad experiences like that. So not really. I think from the religion standpoint, I got really, really lucky, man.
Excellent.
I'm glad where I'm at, but I'm glad I have the perspective where I came from, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I mostly feel the same way, that I'm, especially because Orlando's a fairly liberal place, and most of the religion I've run up against is fairly liberal and pretty passive. But just to have the perspective that, you know, at some point I believed in this thing that's completely not real, but it was real to me. And to have that, and some people who just didn't have that at all. I certainly have friends who were complete or atheists from the beginning. And I don't know, it's not that, at least in my experience with them, it's not that their imagination lacked, but it's like they really legitimately couldn't wrap their head around it. And I'm really glad that I can wrap my head around it, because you really, to understand, I mean, we're still talking about, 85-90% of the country, right? So this is a lot of people who really have these actual beliefs, that they actually believe that these things are real or were real or whatever. So
isn't that crazy to you? I don't know if it's because I don't talk about religion to the people I surround myself with every day. They kind of know where I'm at, so it kind of gets put off the burner. But it's crazy to me that there's still that many people. To me, it seems so common and natural to not believe in those things, that whenever you throw out statistics, I know those are accurate. There's a large number of American population, and if we talk about the world even more, right, we're completely into this belief that is all consuming in one way or another, is consuming or affecting their lives. And to me, it's so natural not to feel any of that or have that burden on my shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
it's a strange phenomenon.
To be able to sympathize with that mindset, I think is really important. That's, for me, a part of this journey, and especially making a podcast and having this be some of the subject matters, is really, really important, that we don't completely forget that mindset and that ideology, because it's so prevalent in our society. And of course, especially for you, Cameron, your family is still very much a part of it. So to relate to them, you really have to, at least at some degree, put your mind back into that mold, to kind of understand where people are coming from.
Yeah. And you know what? We all need to be more like that, though. That's a good thing. I think that the best trait that humans can have is empathy. And if any time you can put yourself in someone else's perspective or situation and maybe not agree with it, but understand it as well as you can. And if you don't understand it, be okay with it, right? It's not affecting me, and I'm okay with these things. I think that empathy is so important. I constantly tell people, if there's one thing you can be more of, be more empathetic. How many less wars would we have? How many, everyone, we got to get all of our leaders together and throw them in a room with a bunch of LSD and have them be more empathetic and solve all of our problems quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Amen, brother.
Again, Cameron, thank you so much for your time and your deep thoughts. And Aaron, thank you for wrangling Cameron up from Reddit. I think it's crazy cool that we live in a time where we can just sync up with minimal effort with someone a couple thousand miles away and have a conversation as full and deep as this one. So thank you both.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure being here. I love talking about these things, and thanks for the invite, guys.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Things We Think About. Check out Cameron's post in our description in our show notes. And all right. Well, take care, guys. Thanks.
If you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find more Things We Think About discussion on Reddit at r/Things We Think About. If you're interested in contributing to the show, our Patreon information is available in the description of the podcast, as well as on any of our YouTube videos.